Good evening. My name is Donna Roper-Roach, and I am presenting the final exam, critical review, and commentary on American education. For this assignment, we were asked to critically review the May 2017 article from Inside Higher Education showing 11 lessons from the history of higher education. I listed the lessons here for consideration, although I would not review them all. Lessons 1 through 5 are on this slide, and lessons 6 through 11 are on slide 3. I selected lesson 1, lesson 3, and lesson 5. My approach was to summarize each of the lessons, add a philosophy perspective, a commentary on the philosophies, and then discuss envisioned or visioning the future. Lesson 1, debates over mission and meaning of higher education are long-standing. All right. So the year report of 1828 defined the purpose of American higher education according to the 11 lessons. The report offered an alternative to a theological or classically grounded curricula and vocational or pre-professional training in favor of an education designed to nurture the architecture of the mind and promote self-formation. I recall in one of our readings that early education was for men primarily of the wealthy class and was primarily for careers in theology and politics. So I would see by the time 1828 that there would be a discussion about whether the emphasis on theological courses is still needed. The year report of 1828 was presented in two parts. Part one was a general discussion on the nature of liberal arts education, and part two was the argument for keeping ancient language in the curriculum. The year report led to an importance in removing religious education from the forefront of college education. So it was determined basically that religious education was not necessarily relevant, and so it needed to no longer be in the forefront. This was interesting to me because my university is private and is faith-based, and we still, of course, have a school of theology. So we have maintained theology, if not at the forefront, but certainly a major component of education at the university. And what I did listed here, and I won't review these either, but just the progression of educational thoughts, educational philosophies, from Perennialism through essentialism, progressivism to reconstructivism. I would add that progressivism was probably the way my parents received their education. I know up until my father's passing about 2-3 years ago, he could recite long poems, long passages that he had learned when he was in elementary school or in grade school, as he would call it. And so repetition and memorization was an important part of that curriculum. He would also mention that how punishment and discipline was a part of their academic routine. Students needed to follow the instructions of the principal, the classroom, of the instructor, or there was consequences in the form of some type of discipline. And then now we have Reconstructionism. When I think of Reconstructionism, I think of the birth of the HBCUs. I think of a changing world after the Great Depression, and looking at ways to solve the world's problems. I want to talk a little bit, and I'm not going to read this, but just about Dewey and Freire, how they thought about mission and meaning in higher education, particularly Freire, who thought that education at that time was kind of like a banking system where educators were just pouring in information into students and not having any dialogue or any interaction. He also felt that education was kind of oppressed those that were educated were often oppressed, or people that were marginalized didn't even receive education. And the oppressors made it for them and forced it from them, often with the help of the church. The goal of Freire's education was to achieve the opposite. His goal was liberation, not oppression, not domination, not pouring in without drawing out what was in the individual. He wanted to create a new man. This philosophy is from the works of Giroux, and he talked about universities designed to facilitate corporate demand as opposed to creating thinkers, creating critical thinkers. They wanted to create a workforce that would enable the United States to compete and maintain its role as a major global economic and political power. So these are just different ways in which theorists, educational theorists, view education. And so envisioning the future, today's dominant view enshrined in mission statements and presidential addresses um, on one hand, to serve the needs of the workforce, yes, but on the other hand, to nurture democratic citizens, global perspectives, critical thinkers, and provide community service. There's also this thinking that education is designed to be more student-centric. The student body has never been homogenous. And as I mentioned earlier, in early American education, it was specifically designed for men and for wealthy class. This article, this is a summary of lesson 3. The American higher education was never as exclusively as elitist as it was sometimes assumed. Even in the colonial era, the student body included sons of farmers like John Adams and other non-elitists. Today, the fastest growing segment of the student population consists of non-traditional students, low-income students, full-time workers, working adults, parents. As a result, higher education needs to adjust to better meet the needs from these different perspectives. Um, in my university, my role is within the School of Graduate Studies, and I see this shift of non-traditional students. These students work full time. They're adults, and they have families. They have commitments, and so we have to keep this in mind when we design our curriculums, when we deliver our courses, so that we can accommodate these students. Online learning has been very, very beneficial to these learners because they can work asynchronously. They don't have to come into the classroom. They can work at their own pace, at their own time. Another theme in the history of higher education is the recurrence of student unrest. And this quote here speaks, it comes from Jubb's article, and I have a section here underlined. For example, in 1900, only 10% of school-age children even attended secondary schools, let alone graduated diplomas, and as late as 1940s, fewer than 30% of white children and fewer than 10% of children of color finished high school. So it goes back to my point again that school education was not open for everyone, that it was designed initially, American education, for the wealthy, for men, and although there were exceptions, as Alexander Hamilton, that was definitely not the rule. Um, when we talk about student bodies not being homogenous, I thought this was an interesting quote because education in Brazil, um, Freire saw that the poor were not receiving an education. And so this quote, when an illiterate peasant participates in this sort of education experience, he or she becomes a new awareness of self, as a new sense of dignity, and is stirred by a new hope. Time and again, peasants have expressed their discoveries in striking ways after just a few hours of class. They say, I now realize that I'm a person, an educated person. We were blind, but now our eyes are opened. Before this, the world meant nothing to me. Now they speak to me and I can speak to them. Now we no longer be like dead weight on the corporate farm. So education was a way of liberating, was a way of creating new men and women among a group of people who previously were not receiving educate the advantage of an education. And want to talk a little bit about diversity here. Culture is an important factor in curriculum planning and drives the content in every curriculum. This is because the essence of education is to transmit the cultural heritage of a society to a younger generation in society. So not only should education be homogenous, it should be open to the rich, to the poor, to male, to female, but it also should take into consideration their culture, whether it's an ethnic culture or a or or age or sex or gender. Um, these cultures should be taken into consideration when planning curriculum and designing curriculum. This is another statement by Paulo Freire, and he emphasized not oh, now he was against the banking system pouring in. He thought that a dialogue was needed. Education, on the contrary, dialogue characterizes an epistemological relationship. Thus, in this sense, dialogue is a way of knowing and should never be viewed, especially important in reducing unrest was freeing students to organize. And I thought this um, literary and debate societies really pointed back to the dialogue that that Freire mentions, and the importance of dialogue when we can communicate with each other and we can understand, we develop an understanding of one another's point of view. And then lesson 5, forms of pedagogy and assessment have changed to meet the shifting needs of the time. The authors, how do we teach and assess and teach reflect the kinds of graduate we hope to produce? Do we want to bring as many students as possible to mastery, or do we want to separate the wheat from the chaff? Do we want students who can collaborate, manage products, and solve problems, or do we want students to be able to recall facts? In the 19th century, an older form of pedagogy emphasizing recitation and memorization, which I talked about was my dad, when my dad received education, and corporal punishment and shame. A particular mindset also overtook the academy, a set of attitudes well suited for the industrial area. And it involved a massive production, one-size-fits-all paradigm, which assumed that students should acquire the same information at the same pace, back to fair again, and transmission model of instruction, which a content expert delivered to a body of information to massive students. So here we have John Dewey, and his purpose of education contributes to individuals' personal, social, and intellectual growth. Paulo Freire, he thought education should raise consciousness about exploitative conditions. Education based on active learning. John Dewey, students learn best when their interests are engaged. Important to develop ideas, activities, and events that stimulate students' interest. And Paul Freire was opposed to the banking system of education, the act of depositing in which the students are depositors and the teachers are the depositaries and the teachers are the depositors. This system does not see the person as a conscious being. And then education based on problem solving. Dewey valued real life context and problems as educational experience. Students are not passive learners. Individuals learn and grow as a result of experience and interactions with the world. Fairy education based on problem posing ensures active teachers and active students within the classroom and global community. Already it seems that the information age is bringing a fresh approach to pedagogy that is more personalized, immersive, intuitive, self-paced, adaptive, and stressing